Denise has been a user of a variety of mental health services during her journey and has recently received another diagnosis, leaving her with yet another challenge to her well-being. So here's Denise to tell her story. You and your family have a connection with Carrington Hospital. The Unitech site, the Technical Institute that currently runs here is resident in the old Carrington Hospital buildings. So what was your connection to Carrington?
Yeah, well, I just thought when I came in here, it's quite ironic, really, that I'm coming and giving a talk here about this because, my very first contact with mental health services was actually for another family member, my dad, and he was in Carrington when I was a very young child, and so we would have visited him. And I also remember my mother, who was a psychiatric nurse a bit later on, they did a top hospital, and where all the different nurses and different hospitals, King's Seat and Carrington and whoever else was around at the time, Lake House and so forth, got together and they all competed to see, did all these, a bit taken off the top town thing, I think.
Yeah, well, we used to do a top town at framework, actually, as part of our annual touch tournament. So I was just thinking of that. What was it like, though, for you as a young child to go into a acute psychiatric unit?
Well, I can't really remember all that much. I remember the top town thing. Quite a bit. I remember my mother getting her hips caught in the tyre that they had to, the rubber tyre that they had to try and climb through. But we were, as kids, we were all allowed to be given a go. I didn't have any thoughts as in, oh my goodness, I'm in a psychiatric hospital or anything like that. It was just a fun place to be with my family. And
right, but your father was a patient there.
Yeah, well, actually, I don't know if he was then. That might have been a bit earlier. The top town was a bit later.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you visit your father, though, in a psychiatric hospital?
Well, when he first came to Carrington, I would have only been about 18 months, but it had a huge impact on my life because our family was split up. And so for a period of time I was separated from my family, and that had quite an impact on me as a child. So I was very young, 18 months at the time.
And separated from your mother as well as your father?
Yeah, like I went to stay with my granny. It's sort of quite hard from the family history to figure out how long that was for.
Right.
But I think it might have been about 6 months or something. So it had an impact, separating from my siblings and so forth, because I was obviously traumatised after that, because some things happened that made it obvious that I was affected quite a bit.
Well, I would say that just having to visit a psychiatric unit in the days when, I've got visions, memories of a lot of very old women sitting around in sort of hallways when I went to see my mother, and she was considerably younger than some of those women there, but Sunnyside Hospital was a very traumatic place for a young person to visit, and not the sort of introduction that most children would have had in their early life.
Yeah, well, I guess there's two sides to that, because I remember I thought for years when I was in hospital at a young age, my younger brother came to visit me, and he sort of said to me that I was wrapped like it meant so much to me that my baby brother used to come in and visit me, and years later I said something to him about how wonderful that was, and he goes, I didn't really come to visit you, it's just that you had a table tennis table there.
Really?
So he wasn't impacted on it. It was just a fun place for him to be,
Right, so how old were you when he was coming to visit you in a psych?
16.
16?
Yeah.
So that was your introduction to mental health services, 16?
No. That was the first time I was committed into one of the institutions.
Right.
But my first introduction to mental health services was when I was 5. When I went to school, I think the teachers thought, holy crap, what have we got here?
Oh.
And I was sent to educational psychologists and so forth. And again, when I was... the funny thing is that the guy's conclusion was, because Mum wasn't working at that stage, was that, she was an overindulgent mother, and that whatever was wrong with me was because I got too much attention and I should be just given less attention. And the following year, when I went to the same psychologist, my mum had started working, and the conclusion at that stage was that it was because she was a negligent mother and she was working, mothers were not good for children, so all my behavioural problems were because of that.
But she was working as a psychiatric nurse?
She originally started as a psychopedic nurse.
Right.
And then went to psychiatric and then back to psychopedic, yeah.
Yeah. Were the psychologists that were seeing you aware of the fact that you had a mother who was a psychiatric nurse?
Yeah. Yeah, I probably, because they interviewed the family and,
right.
So forth. So I now have recently, at age 52, been given a diagnosis of autistic spectrum disorder. And when I look back into those years of when I was in the primary school, to me, my behaviours were very autistic. And in fact, over the years when I had therapy and that, I often had comment from my therapist that I had that, gosh, you almost seem like you're autistic, but nobody really figured it out.
What is it, 45 years later that this diagnosis has been confirmed?
Well, I think that I felt grief-stricken more than anything else, because I see how I was as a youngster and my connections with mental health services, and I had a lot of potential. As a child, I was super intelligent, and I had a lot of gifts as well as having a lot of behavioural problems, and so I feel sad that so much of that's just. I feel bereft, actually, that it could have been so very different if what I'd been offered as a child. But what did happen was at age 11 I was medicated, and then at around that age I started having regular contact with mental health services. I had a lot of behaviour modification and stuff like that, and we also had. I was also very vulnerable because I was a very needy sort of. I was left to my own devices a lot, so myself and other members of my family were sexually abused, and so we had that stuff going on. And then when I was 12, nearly 13, my brother was tragically killed in a car accident, hit by a train, and my auntie died a month later by a car accident.
You're with Take It From Us on 104.6.
We're talking today to Denise Caltaux, who has her own page on Facebook called Mental Health Consumer, Fiora Information Sharing. But Denise has been very involved with the consumer movement. She's been involved in documentaries about mental health and about the consumer movement, and also been a guest on the Nutters Club as well. So there's this sort of dilemma, Denise, that some of your life is quite solitary, quite reclusive, and yet you're out there in these media, taking up media opportunities.
Yeah, it's a bit of irony, really, isn't it? Because for some reason I'm often the way my mind thinks, I'm often very pioneering in my thinking, and that a lot of what I'm quite creative, and so I can see a whole lot of things that other people don't. Like, if there's 1,000 threads to something, other people might see 100 of them, and I see the 1,000 at the same time. The difficulty that I have sometimes is, how do I get that information across to people? So I do get involved with I've done a lot of mental health auditing and quality improvement and that sort of stuff as well, and I was a lecturer at the Polytech in Dunedin, where I was teaching people about mental health stuff, and what the struggle is how do you tell people about these 1,000 threads when you've only got time to tell them in the 100 threads? Which ones do you pick out? And that's one of the communication difficulties of having autism, because my mind will be going, I've got every single little detail, all these things like, what do I actually tell people to get this information across? And one of the things that happens for me a lot is the things that I've been involved in and set up, I don't make myself very popular, and I often feel very socially separated from people, but people see me as achieving a lot and as being a leader. And like I was involved in sort of re-establishing how the consumer network in Northland was sort of set up, and I became the chair of the trust there, and we umbrellaed it under another organisation. So I sort of took, that organisation and just helped redesign it. At the end of the day, I was on my own, because the other consumers who should actually be my peers saw me differently, and part of that is because I feel so pressured to get the information across and to make the changes that I'm not very good at maintaining the relationships in the process of doing that.
Is there a degree of frustration that people are not maybe keeping up with your vision or your thoughts?
It's not so much that they're not keeping up, it's that I'm desperate to. I see how important it is, and I see the whole picture, so I know where it's going and what it's going to look like in the end and why.
But you want it all to happen tomorrow?
Well, it's the change management. Like, how do you actually get people to get on board, and all those little nitpicky things that I find I have a real intolerance for. Right. And so I really need to have people. When I've been successful in my life is when I've actually had somebody there with me that's able to do that part of it, because I can't do it.
Right.
And so, but by excluding me completely as a person, other people are missing out, because there's something I have to offer, but I can't do it on my own.
You're with Take It From Us on 104.6 Planet FM.
And I'm host Sheldon Brown with technician Declan Curran on Take It From Us, and we're talking today to Denise Caltaux, who has her own Facebook page called Mental Health Consumer Fiora Information Sharing, and we did promise our listeners that we'd get back to this. So, how long's the Facebook group been running, Denise?
Well, I started it maybe 4 years or so ago. But then I became very unwell again a couple of years ago, and I wasn't able to do it. In fact, I found it very hard to do the Facebook page when I was not well, because when you're constantly trolling for mental health stuff and it's in your face all the time, it's actually very toxic, to be thinking about these things all the time.
So how do you, that is a very relevant thing. I think those of us who work in mental health, there's a lot of negativity, isn't there? There's a lot of criticism of the mental health system and that sort of thing. How do you sort of protect yourself?
Not very well. The reason why I set this group up was because the consumer network up north had been going for quite some time, and it had always been part of the brief and my understanding that it would become part of what was done as part of the consumer network roles within the paid workforce.
What do you mean, not only in Northland but throughout the country?
Yeah, to me that sort of seems like that's the ideal place, because information, as you know, is power. Like, I guess the thing that motivated me originally to set it up is I was very passionate about suicide prevention and trying to help set some things up, because I didn't feel that the services responded very well to that sort of thing. And when the government started talking about suicide, when they changed, because it used to be illegal to talk about suicide publicly, and then they changed it and said, well, that's not working. We've got a lot of youth particularly dying, and so we need to start talking about it.
Northland, your experiences haven't always been very therapeutic.
No, my experience in Northland, in Whangarei Hospital, in the acute unit and the subacute unit was actually horrendous, life-changingly horrendous, and incredibly traumatic. And I feel very, very sad that that's the case. In fact, I felt gutted for all the work that so many good people over the years have been involved in trying to improve the services, trying to, make things. And it really is obvious that the risk management is a big consideration, and really people's experiences. I'll tell you a little story. If I've got time to tell a little story.
Yeah.
When I was in the subacute, I came across a young man. He was the sort of the area that people target. He was a rural guy, and he was a young guy, and he had been suicidal, and he had reached out and asked for help. And anyway, he was talking to me about what had happened to him, that he'd talked to his parents about how desperate he was for help. And his parents took him to mental health services. And then, to me, automatically, when somebody's asking for help, they're open to help. That's just the nature, it's inherent. So there's this person that's open to help and wanting to be helped. His parents and the psychiatrist ended up sort of ganging up on him. He ended up being committed and being forced to do treatment and to do things that he didn't want to do, being forced to stay there. And anyway, the sad thing is that he'd been in hospital several months, and he was sort of getting ready to leave, and he said, I can't freaking wait to get out of here. He said, I'm never, ever coming back. I'll never ask for help again. Never, ever. I'll never put myself in this situation again. And I just felt so sad. I just felt so sad. And I said, look, I'm really sorry. It's not supposed to be like that.
It's a terrible indictment on a place which is supposed to be therapeutic and based on recovery.
But the thing that I don't get is how come when somebody's willing and asking for help, what happened that he actually ended up feeling
he'd never asked for help again. What about your own experience? Is it true that you had to escape from acute services?
Well, I ran away because I had some. I'm so traumatized. I've been so traumatized. Pretty much the last year of my life has been trying to overcome the trauma that I experienced when I was there. And I still feel quite shaky just thinking about it. And I'm too scared to go back to my home in Northland because I don't want to be under mental health services in Northland. My adult life, I've had probably 6 years as an inpatient all up in a few places, yeah.
Right. Yes, and so you've had 6 years of acute treatment.
Yes, yeah, as an inpatient, yeah.
Right, and you lived in Dunedin and had some exposure to Ashburn Clinic as well.
I did, yes. When I was younger, I was at Ashburn Clinic, and then I was there again last year. Because, things have not all been doom and gloom. I've had some very good experiences and very good treatment, and my experiences meeting people that are in mental health services has been a real value to my life as well. So, Ashburn Clinic, it was Ashburn Hall in my younger days. It saved my life.